Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the real story of Xiaomi and its founder, Lei Jun. We're going to get past all the headlines to uncover what actually made this company a global powerhouse.
So you've almost definitely seen this photo comparison before. Back in 2011, Xiaomi launched its very first smartphone, and its founder, Lei Jun, got up on stage looking, well, a whole lot like Steve Jobs. The black shirt, the jeans, the whole presentation style, it was impossible to miss. And look, this created a super simple, really easy narrative for the media to run with, right? The Steve Jobs of China is selling an iPhone knockoff. But the real story is so much more interesting, and it doesn't start with imitation. It starts with a totally different philosophy that actually has nothing to do with Apple at all. Okay, let's get into it, because to really truly understand Xiaomi, you have to get your head around Lei Jun's core idea, which, believe it or not, came from a very unexpected place. He wasn't trying to be the next Apple. His big inspiration was the Japanese retailer Muji. You know them. They're famous for that minimalist, high-quality, no-logo approach to everything from pens to furniture. It's all about stripping away the fluff and just focusing on what really, truly matters. And you can see this philosophy in action right here. On the left, you've got your typical appliance, just covered in buttons and screens. And on the right, the Xiaomi solution, a simple, clean, elegant box. The absolute genius of this was moving all the complicated controls into a smartphone app. It made the hardware look better, feel more modern, and it made it way cheaper to build. But this wasn't just about making things look good. It was a core business strategy he called the 80-80 rule. The idea is, instead of chasing after the most extreme, high-end features that only a tiny fraction of people ever use, you focus on perfecting the features that 80% of people need 80% of the time. That let them absolutely nail the price-to-performance ratio. So where did this unique way of thinking come from? Well, it definitely wasn't some overnight idea. It was actually forged over decades. Decades of struggle and frustration. Long before Xiaomi was even a thought. Lei Jun was no overnight success, not by a long shot. He was a classic university hacker back in the late 80s, even co-founded a little software team, before joining one of China's very first software companies, Kingsoft. He then spent 16 grueling years there, working his way all the way up to president. See, as a student, he completely devoured this book, Fire in the Valley. It's all about the early days of Silicon Valley. You know, the hackers like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. He saw himself in those stories, these guys changing the world from their garages, and it sparked this lifelong dream to build something truly great. But his time at Kingsoft was just filled with painful lessons. He led this huge software project that got absolutely crushed by Microsoft Word. And over time, the company he'd poured his life into had to pivot into making video games just to survive. He felt this deep sense of emptiness, like that original dream was just slipping through his fingers. So after finally resigning from Kingsoft at 38, feeling like he had one last shot to build that dream, he decided to do everything completely backwards from how the rest of the industry did it. And this right here, this is the core of the Xiaomi method. Most companies build a piece of hardware, and then they figure out the software to put on it. Xiaomi flipped that whole process on his head. They started with the user experience, the apps. Then they built an operating system, MIUI, to make that experience perfect. And only then, as the very last step, did they build a phone designed specifically to run that software. And get this, they launched their user interface, MIUI, a full year before they even had a physical phone to sell. They just put it online for tech nerds to install on other Android phones, and they spent a year refining it week after week based on feedback from this tiny, super dedicated community of fans he called his 100 Dream sponsors. Now, you have to remember what the market was like at the time. The phone everyone in China wanted was the iPhone 4, but it came with a price tag that was just completely out of reach for most people, almost 5,000 yen. And then, after a year of listening and perfecting the software with their community, Xiaomi launched its first phone. The price? 1,999 yuan. We're talking less than half the price of an iPhone. The result wasn't just a success, it was an absolute explosion. The market had been starving for a product that hit this perfect sweet spot of performance, user experience, and price. They sold over 300,000 phones in the first 22 hours. It was wild. So here's the crucial point. The real story isn't that Lei Jun wore a black t-shirt. The real story is the massive ripple effect his method had on an entire country's manufacturing industry. Before Xiaomi, made in China often meant cheap and low quality. Xiaomi just shattered that whole idea. They showed Chinese manufacturers a brand new playbook. Focus on the user, focus on clean design, and deliver an incredible price-to-performance ratio. They didn't just build a phone. They basically sparked a quality revolution for an entire country. And that brings us right back to that first image, doesn't it? Lei Jun wasn't just on stage impersonating his hero. He was finally becoming one, on his own terms, after a 20-year journey. He was a homegrown innovator, just like those heroes he read about in Fire in the Valley.
And it's a journey that really leaves you with one big question to think about. What kind of perseverance, what kind of failure, and what kind of insane clarity of vision does it take to hold on to a single dream for 2 decades before finally, against all odds, making it real?